Okay, I got a new Holland Boomer 41, and the complaint is a little piece of metal fell out, which is a bearing race. And this wheel flops around, and when you spin it, it sounds like a blender. Yeah, so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to take this wheel off, take the lugs off, and then I'm gonna take this top bracket, these 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4. This whole top piece comes off, so your tie rod end, your power assist will kind of hang to the side. And then I'm gonna end up dropping this knuckle off in 2 halves, bottom, top. And if this shaft has a snap ring in it by chance, then I'm gonna end up just taking the 4 bolts off, 1, 2, 3, 4, and slide the knuckle off. And I'm gonna take it to the shop and tear it apart and show you what it looks like inside. Okay guys, so I got to the shop and I got the knuckle on the bench. So I just wanna show you what this looks like. So there's the top where it goes in the axle tube. Here's your spindle where it separates. And then here's your front. This is your hub. This is where your wheel goes. So you can kind of see just how bad this is. Like there should be a rubber seal in here, which is actually right here. Came all the way out. And there should be some bearings and all sorts of stuff. So you can see that this, I could shove my whole fingers in there and it's a close gap over here. So this is pretty well toast. Okay. So while it's on the bench, it's sitting here. There's 1, 2, 2, 4, 6, 7, 11/16 bolts. 1 bolt that was 9/16. Okay. The 9/16 was right here. They all look like they're the same thread pitch. So I don't know if one of these, because they actually look the same. So one of them is longer. That 11 and the 9/16 bolt is actually a little bit longer. So that's probably what the difference is there. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of beat on this a little bit and pry on it. It's going to be glued in with RTV. So it'll be a little tricky to get apart, but nothing I haven't really dealt with in the past. So yeah. So what I did was I tapped with a hammer right here. You got to be very careful not to smack something like right here and cause a crack. That would be really bad. All I did was gave it like 3 or 4 decently hard taps, and then I'll hear a stud, thud, tink, and that means that the seal has broken. And so what I did is I just tapped this guy in super lightly. I'm not actually forcing it in. You don't want to scratch up these surfaces in here. So now that I got that in here, I'm just going to give it a little wiggle. I'm going to come down here and give it another little wiggle. And this is just incrementally just going to pop right out. Of course, I'll probably have to put the camera down to actually get this knuckle out. Or maybe I can. We'll find out. It's just going to be heavy and awkward. Oh, there you go. I should make a YouTube channel called The One-Arm Mechanic. And it's just a guy doing everything one-handed. Which is kind of difficult. Hold on a second. Okay, I did 2 hands, 2 pry bars, 1 on each side, and it popped. And I can already see that's a bearing race right there. Let's moment of truth, guys. Obviously, I haven't taken this apart yet, so I don't know what's inside. All I know is that it's really ugly from the outside. So, and boom, look at that. What? Okay, anyway, so now we got this guy open. Key note right here is all these chunks of metal. And these teeth are a little banged up. Now, it depends on your situation. In a lot of cases, I'm actually going to take all that end apart in a second here. I just wanted to show you the initial and get this oil cleaned up. There are marks on these teeth. Now, if this was running down the highway, I'd say absolutely got to replace the teeth. Like if this was a carrier, if this was a differential in a truck or something. But because this is just working around some guy's property in a farm field, I probably would opt to tell this guy, you know, none of the teeth are missing. They just got a mark on them. You'll be fine to just keep running this if we rebuild it and save these gears. But if this tooth was missing, or this tooth was missing, or this was cracked, I would not try to keep it. Secondly, these bearings, actually, this turns really smoothly. But once I actually bust this nut and take it apart, I'll actually see if it's something worth keeping. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have to take a punch, and I'm going to have to punch in this hole to bulge this back out before I can take this nut off. And then I'm going to get to the front, and I'm going to get some towels because this is going to spill over all over the floor. So what I did is I got a punch, nice little cone tip right there. And then I got that right in here. Shabam, shabam. Now it's actually spread apart so I can spin the nut. Then I got my 2-inch socket, 3/4 drive, 1/2-inch impact with a 3/4 adapter. Hello, welcome home. Okay, so we got the nut off, right? That right there. This bearing is probably gonna have to get pulled off with a puller, but I'm gonna put the camera down and see what I got here. Straight down in here, we've got this ball bearing thing, which we don't want to lose. So what I'll do is I will tip this guy, and here's that other half. So you see how there's that collar with the O-ring, and then it's face to face, this metal surface to metal surface. So they're basically back to back. And you seal each housing individually. So now this guy's gonna go like this. I'm gonna flip this guy over. There we go. So there's your ball bearing piece that I was just showing you. Put that right there. And now this is kind of a tricky thing right here. So I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head how I'm gonna get this, but to get this shaft out, I have to take this nut off and slide the shaft out, and then I can take the bearing out the front this way. But I can't do that without busting this nut loose. But, oh, actually I did. I already got it. Yeah. So, by the way, this was a 1.5-inch socket on that, and it busted the nut loose, and the nut already busted loose, but I'm gonna try take it off some more and then separate it. So I've got this guy out, and there's this collar right here that has an O-ring on it, and this guy gets pressed onto there. Very careful, because this thing has a sharp edge to it, which I don't like. This guy goes face down, oops, in here, which is pressed like this. It's just pressed into this hole, so I can get it fed in there. So this guy gets pressed in there, and then it looks like the bearing race of this guy, it's kind of hard to tell because I feel like I need to look at a parts diagram is really what I got to do, but it looks like there's this one, and then there's actually that other one, that O-ring, and then some of that other bearing race. So there's another one of these that's actually flipped this way, and that one would ride in that groove like that. All right. So this would actually get pressed into here real snug, but obviously the housing is trashed, and that'll just destroy another O-ring because it's gouged there. It's all cracked off the housing here. So this whole plate's going to get replaced. And then what you have is the O-ring faced down. Another one's facing up. That presses into here. Now you have an outside seal for this piece and then this piece. And then the bearing is going to sit right in here, but which obviously the bearing's blown out. And then that is all sandwiched together, and then that's pressed on, right? So this guy, I would say we would take it apart, but there's the ball bearing race right underneath that snap ring right there. But I don't need to remove it and reuse it because we're not reusing this housing anyway. So I got to get a new housing, the inside bearing, the O-rings for that guy, and that metal, this piece. This little metal thing that the O-ring goes on to seal into this groove, into that groove. And actually what I need to do is I need to look at this guy and make sure, there's no damage in here. There's just debris, which I can clean out. If this is where the bearing is pressed onto, the inside race of this bearing, because you have an outside and you have an outside bearing housing or race, and you have an inside race, right? So if the inside race slides right on here, it's kind of like how this one does, like that, If it presses on like that on that one right here, above this step onto here, we're going to be fine. If it goes on here, technically we would be fine, but I think this guy would go like this and another one would go on top of that. So therefore there isn't going to be, I need to look at a parts diagram actually. So I think if this one goes on upside down, then it would not fit. It's hard to tell without having all the rest of the parts, because when I got this, it's kind of hard to tell how it's supposed to go back together. But I'll grab a parts diagram and show you guys what I'm into, and that'll explain what we're doing here. But it looks like at the moment we're going to get this guy, this outside O-ring right here, the inside bearing, those O-rings, this piece, this metal ring, and then I'm going to look at the diagram and see kind of where the bearings are going to go, and that'll help me determine whether I got to replace this guy or not. But with the Mars on these splines, that's going to be, I'll put this guy on to show you, like that. See, it's below where the threads need to be, so I'm not too worried about that. And this guy's going to come up just a hair like that and will sit against that bearing, and then that nut will go on top of that. So I don't think we're going to replace this. I don't think we're going to replace that, but I have to double check. And then it's just going to be these parts right here. Now, I do still have to take this guy apart and make sure that the bearing, obviously these teeth are full of debris, which I got to clean out. But I got to make sure that this stuff didn't get stuck in the bearings faces at all. Because if it did, then I got to do all these bearings here too. And I most likely will, just because, I probably will find damage in there. I'm not too certain I won't find damage, I guess is where I'm at, but that'll be next. Okay, I did the three-hander. I put a pry bar here, hammer here, held this, and then held the pry bar down with my hip. Got this to pop. That's off now. And now this guy's off. And look at that beauty. Wow. Okay, so now what I'll do is I will take more of this carnage out. Look at all that bearing race and everything. So what I'll do here is I'll pull this guy off, put that over, and the housing is gone. Okay, so this guy is in for a little bit more than we wanted, right? There's my balls. Okay, so man, that's questionable. Ugh, yeah. Interesting. I need to get my tripod thing figured out, but check this out. So what I did is I held this here like this, and I tapped on the shaft. You got to make sure that your hammer is extremely square and flat with this. If you hit it at an angle, you destroy the threads, and we don't want to do that. So we're about to pop off right there. And that's going to be a little difficult with one hand. So 1 second. Okay, so what I ended up doing was I got two pry bars in there, and I kind of did like two joysticks back and forth in here, and I kind of just walked it and banged it and banged it, and now they're separated. And so the bearing, what I'll do is I'm going to let it set in its race. And by the way, I missed it. I missed something pretty critical here. So look how tight this gap is. It barely fits through here. But once I get this out, there's something that I missed here that I noticed. So I got the bearing on the bottom, right? Bearing. This guy is pressed on here like this, and you smack them together and it's tight, right? Now, there was this ball bearing thing, right? Well, that actually rides on this piece. So this goes bearing, gear, spacer, which it was so tight it looked like it was machined as part of the gear, but it's actually not. It actually pops right off. But that goes there, and this guy is right on top. Nice. So that is what I missed there. And now that I did that, I've got it all apart. So that's the bottom. And now that I have this here, like this, right? What I can do is I can reach in and I can tap this out real carefully. What I can do is I can just go like this, and I would go like this, and I would just tap it, and then tap it, and that's gonna pop right out. So once that's out, this bushing is fine. This guy is fine, but we'll obviously, like I said, replace that O-ring on that half and that half. This piece goes on top of the bearing like this. Okay. So you'll go taper cone, you'll go cover, shim, taper cone, which is your bearing race, your bearing, your gear, your spacer, your half bearing, your balls, your outside race or your flat surface, vertical shaft. You use the nut to tie it all that together, and then this half will go here, and you'll slide this guy in there, and then you'll put this top gear on, and you'll put this snap ring on top of that, and now that whole assembly is together. So that's how that goes together. This is the bushing that goes right here, and that prevents the two halves from like, how do I say this? What you want to do is have the bottom half and the top half like this, and they're snug. And if we want them to move in unison. If that bushing is bad, what will end up happening is as you're driving, your top half and your bottom half will go like this, and that walking will just destroy the wheel. Your wheel will be sitting crooked, your tractor axle will be looking like that, and your wheel will be, slanted, which we don't want. So now that I have this apart, I know exactly what I'm ordering. Just to recap, what I'll end up getting is another bottom shim, this is probably good, so I'll keep that. I'm going to get a bottom race, bottom bearing cone, bottom bearing. I'll clean this, we'll keep that. I'll clean this, we'll keep that. I'll clean this out and re-oil that guy and make sure it's working good. But if it's got any clicking, I'll replace that. On the top half, we're going to be good there. I'll do this O-ring on this spacer right here. So I'll actually pull it out just so you can see it, right? See that two halves right there? I'm going to pull that out, put an O-ring in there, and then on the front face, we're going to probably keep this. I'll get a new O-ring and race thing, and then I will use this race, but replace this O-ring. That'll go on the other half. Actually, there's one, right? There's one O-ring, one race, flip it over, another race, another O-ring. Then we're going to replace this housing, the outside O-ring, the inside bearing. We'll reuse that snap ring. And then we'll put this guy on, and then we'll have the outside bearing, which actually feels good. We'll probably just clean it, oil it, reuse it, put this big nut back on, and dimple it so it doesn't come loose, and then put it all back together. So that's where I'm at. I'll show you what it looks like when we start to put all the parts back together and after this is clean. Okay, so this is going to be a tricky one to explain here. So this gear has a smooth shaft on each end of the gear, right? The top and the bottom. And the problem that I have is that this bearing is pretty much pressed onto the shaft. So normally what you do is imagine this gear looked like this, right? And you had this bearing and it had to go on the shaft, or maybe that bigger bearing we had. What you do is you would chuck it up and you put the bearing on the shaft and you'd press it onto the shaft, and then you'd put it into place, and now it's together, right? Well, unfortunately, you have no space to take it out as a whole, so you have to separate it. But to separate it, how do you get a tool in there to spread something apart? Normally what you would do is you would do a, it looks like two halves, and they're both sloped like this on each side, and you put the two halves together between it, and you split the two apart. You can't get a tool in here, so what I'm doing is I'm using a wedge of some sort. In this case, it's a flathead, and I'm getting right in here between the two halves, and I go bang and bang, and it's slowly sliding it the two halves apart. So what I'll do is I'll slide it apart, and then I'll wiggle this gear over or spin it like this, and then pull the bearing out, and then pull the gear out separately as two different pieces. Hopefully that's all I need for clearance to get it apart, if I'm lucky. Okay, I got the bottom cover off. This is the bottom plate. You can kind of see right here the carnage, more of the metal and debris down in there, right? The bearing race itself, I'm going to show you on camera in a second here, but this feels okay. So that's promising. So what I did is I took 4 bolts, 11, what is that, 11/16? No, it's 9/16. 11/16, my bad. 11/16, once again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Firm tap, 1, 2, 3. This guy popped, and then I just used a screwdriver and popped it off. Then you go to the top here. I have used a snap ring plier. These are 90-degree snap rings with spring loaded, so they're for external shaft. I slide this little gear off. And I'm gonna separate the two halves. Pull this guy out, put him down, grab this bearing, check it. Whoa! Been waiting so long for that compressor to kick on, I thought the power wasn't working. Okay, got this bearing out. There is another cone race right here, which you can maybe see. All right, cone race in there. That looks pretty good. Now that the snap ring is off and that gear is off, these two parts can actually separate, which is cool. And I will separate it like this. And then this guy, I'm gonna take, so here's that thing again, and actually here might be a better view. This top spindle uses this collar with an O-ring style seal, and we will get this guy, because we'll replace these seals while we're at it. But that's just all it is. It's just a cup. It's a curved race that you put an O-ring on, and then you shove it up in there, and it'll seal against the housing surface. So we'll put that guy right there for now. Just go like that. And then this guy, we're going to go over here. And this shaft, oopsie. So, okay, so here's a trick for you. So I put the whole shaft assembly back in that bearing, and it bottoms out this way, right? So like I could pull the shaft out this way, then I could put it back in the bearing. And what I want to do is I want to get the cone shape of the bearing back in the race. And you can see that the outside race, which is this guy right here, is actually almost flush with the housing. So what I'm doing is I'm doing cone to cone. So I've got a good mating surface. And because I have no resistance, let me see if I can't set this guy up right here like this. I'm going to give this guy a couple love taps, see if it slides out. She's working. There's a little, I feel a little bit of RTV, so somebody might have put some RTV on there, which is not correct. Oh no. And obviously this whole thing's sliding around on me, so it may not be the smartest way to do this. Probably need to put it on a bench, or some sort of surface to hold it. And I probably need to block this thing up so it doesn't slide on me so much as I'm working it. You know, most likely, I obviously am going to replace both the race and the bearing on this just because. And actually, I think the... So I have to change my plan here because as I'm knocking it down, I did get the race to move, but now the teeth are bottoming out on the housing, so that's not going to work. So I'm going to change gears here and try to So technically, I guess the bearing on the bottom there has to separate from the gear. I'm gonna pull the shaft out real quick. Okay, so I busted my nut. Now I'm just gonna pull this shaft straight out the back. Would you look at that? Shaft looks good. I'm gonna lay that down right here for now. Put this in the carnage pile. This guy's gonna go here. Now this guy looks like what it'll do is I'm gonna separate. I don't know if I can do this one-handed again, but I need to probably try to separate the okay, so there's a shim, so that's gonna go on there. I have a feeling that this bottom race actually is going to pop out through the bottom. I might have to take a chisel or a punch and knock it out, and then this whole bearing assembly is going to come out this way with it. And the reason we have this shim here is with this thing all sandwiched together, top to bottom, right? When you sandwich it together, this shim is going to set the preload of the bearing cone or this race into the cone of the bearing. So this is your bearing outer race, and this is the bearing face. It's kind of funny how that works. But if you move that cone in and out, you either make the bearing looser or tighter. So that's a very critical thing to think about. If you have too much pressure, you will smoke a bearing because it binds up. If you don't have enough, it rattles, and then it'll just chew itself up because it's not spinning. It's just kind of skipping and hopping. So I'm going to grab a punch and see if I can't knock this guy down a little bit and see what happens. So we're back with all the new parts. The biggest part of this whole package is going to be this front cover. As you see, that one, as if you remember, is all damaged. I got to pull the snap ring out of that one to reuse, but I will need bearings, seals, that kind of stuff. Look at part numbers in a second here and see which one is which, and kind of show you how this goes back together. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the hub face, get that clean, do the seals, put it all together, get the bearings in this guy, put this whole assembly together, and this is going to be done and clean and ready, and I'm going to set it to the side. And then I'm going to go into, you know, obviously this guy will go in here, and then this guy will go on there, in here. And it'll just be one big assembly. Then I got to clean up all this, pull all these seals out, pull all these shims out, clean it all, put it back together. And I'm going to kind of try show you as I'm going what it looks like. This is obviously clean and brand new. This I've got to clean off, get some of this dirt and crap off of it. I cleaned my counter off as well as I could because this was a huge mess. It's been sitting here for a while I waited for parts, but I'm gonna get it all cleaned up and continue on showing you what to do here. Okay, got that bearing inside. That was a MT403-16067. Then I've got a MT4000734. That is the outside O-ring right here. So now that this is together, what we're going to do is we're going to flip this guy over and set it to the side. And then next up is going to be these seal kits, which are going to be, I'm pretty sure, the MT400 4000-7918. It's two pieces. They face each other. I'll show you that in a second. One goes in there. One goes in there. And so I'll get this cleaned up and prepped, put that part on, flip it over onto here, or actually probably put this on the table, flip this back over it. And then next up would be this ring gear that would go on top of that. And then you have another bearing, and then you have a lock nut. And then that whole front half is going to be done. So, okay, I got this hub face for the wheel cleaned off. And we have a kind of a curved, looks like a quarter pipe that you'd skate on, but it's got a curved surface in here for these O-rings. The part number was MT4000-7918. There is this blue shipping stuff that actually goes between the metal and the rubber. Got to peel that out. One of these is going to go down in the groove like this. And then the next one's going to go into this surface like that. And they seal against each other that way somehow. And yeah, I'll show you what that looks like in a second. So one of the things I want to point out here is when you're putting these seals in, you got the rubber side down, so you have this metal surface that sticks up, right? But it's an extremely tight fit. So what you got to do is you got to kind of shove this thing in at an angle and press one side, feed one side into the groove. And then you got to push down real hard with one hand, and then you take the other hand and you use a little screwdriver like this, and don't stab it, and like don't use a pick and punch it. But you're basically going to come in here and you're going to push and feed little bits at a time all the way around. So you go around this way, and then you come around this way, and then here's some more, and then here's some more, until you get all the way around and the whole thing just pops right in. Other than that, it's extremely difficult. Use a little bit of lube and it should go together. So now that this half is done and this half is done, what we'll do is I will pick this guy up and shove it into here. And there you go. It'll go like that. And then I'm going to flip this guy over, and then we'll get the ring gear on and the top bearing and this lock nut. So like I said, this is what the old one looks like. It's got kind of a taper to it, and you've got the O-ring and this guy, and this actually has a lip to it. So the ring actually goes on like this. Don't mind my fuzz. Yeah, kind of hard to do one-handed, but you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So those are, that's how that works. And like I said, you're going to have a difficult time getting it in here. If you just try to push it, it won't go. You have to get in at an angle and then just kind of feed the O-ring in little bits at a time, using a lot of downward force so it doesn't pop out on another side. But if you push down and feed it in, it'll work. Okay, so I got this ring gear cleaned, and I'm going to put this back on. I took some 80-90 gear oil and soaked those bearings and stuff, and then I put this guy on. And you can see that it doesn't come up flush to where it needs to be. There's a little ledge right there that the bearing's going to sit on. But that's okay, because once you put this bearing on the front here, and you get the nut started and use your impact socket, you can suck it all down, and eventually it'll hit all its ledges and it'll be all sucked together tight. And then this guy will actually close up too. And this should be real close to this hub, this housing and this hub face. There'll be very, very tight gap right here. All right, so I got the stack together. I actually got this nut tightened down, and I actually took it back off so I could show you. You won't get this bearing completely flush, which is okay. But you will see that this gap is pretty much closed. So what I did was I put this guy on and I impacted it down, and it does come to a point where you'll see it shrinking, and then all of a sudden it stops and the impact tone changes, and that's kind of your indication to stop impacting. And that's probably where you're going to have to set it. Also, now that I get this nut on and torqued down, I will put my dimples back in it so that I can lock it in place. And then this guy's done. So then this will go to the side. We'll get to cleaning the housing, and then we'll go from there. So now that I got this bottom cover on, I got the 4 bolts tight. I got that nut on the axle on this vertical shaft tight. And now it all kind of sits where it's supposed to. Now, one of the things you might be surprised about is you'd be like, well, this whole shaft moves up and down, and I think the nut at the bottom is dragging on that cover, and that may be true. But once you get this all on top of here, and you're looking through this hole right here, and you get this gear on top of that, and you put the bearing in, and you put, there's a bearing race right there, and you put the snap ring on, that will kind of raise its height, and it'll actually be centered or where it's supposed to be. And then because of that thrust washer changing the location of the bearing race at the bottom, once you get all this together, it's going to be kind of sloppy right here, especially between the two halves. But when you put a wheel on here and you set it on the ground, those two halves are going to compress to each other with gravity. And then you're going to put this bracket onto the top of the axle, and that will cinch it all together. And the shims between here and here and here and everything is going to cause everything to cinch up right and tight. And not too tight, but that's kind of how that all works. So don't worry too much about the this vertical play right here, as you can see, because it will all kind of settle into place once everything is kind of locked together. So now that I got this all put together, what I'm going to do is clean this housing, get that seal in, drop it on, put that gear in, put that bearing in, and also next thing here, actually, before I go too much further, is that, remember that groove on that bearing, I'm going to clean this guy off, put it down in there, then this bearing, then this shim, and the thrust washer, and then this guy will sit right on top of that, on top of all those things. And then we'll go through here and do that, and we're done. Not bad. Okay, I got that. Like I said, I have this guy upside down like this on the bench. I tapped it through the hole till it was solid. You can see that there's no gap between the bearing and the gear. Then I tapped in my race, and then I flip it back over this way. Clink. Now it's in. Now it's set. And what I'll do is I'll actually set the race further in like this. Couple notches in, and then this ring right here is actually what sets your preload or height on that guy. So I'll put that there, and then this lip will also shove the whole assembly forward. So just because it looks like it's touching right now, don't worry, it won't be in a second. Key note here in terms of order of putting things together. So we have this new cone bearing, right? This taper bearing and this gear. It does not fit through that hole, like I said a second ago, if I put that in the video. So what you have to do is have this race out. You put this gear in, you put this taper facing down, because obviously your bottom race is going to be slid in. So what you're going to do is you're going to put this in, you put this in, and you line it up, and you're going to use a hammer and tap it into place. And what I would do is put this guy on the edge of your bench, you tap this guy into place, and then you put the cone bearing in, flush with this surface, you put this cover on, and then you flip it back over. And then now you're ready to stack everything else on top of it. Okay, I got this other housing cleaned out. It's all nice and shiny and clean. We've got this bottom cover off. As you may remember, we've got that vertical shaft that goes through that kind of holds the two halves together. I got this cone bearing out, taper bearing, and the race done. I'm going to put that one to the side. It's just got a bunch of marks and stuff on it from the metal debris, so I'm going to leave that out. And I'm going to replace it with this guy. Got this all cleaned up. I got a new bearing on there. And this bearing is basically going to get tapped onto here. And then I'm going to drop it through the hole in here. And then slide it forward. And then all this other stuff kind of goes together. And I'll show you that in a second. All right, so now that I got this shaft in, I also got that 3-piece bearing in, like I was telling you a second ago. 3 layers, 1, 2, 3, got them clean and lubed and dropped in one at a time, and they just kind of center on the shaft, which is nice. Next up is, now that I got that in, that's what this would ride on that bearing. And then there's a bushing that's in the center of this housing, and that's actually what keeps this guy straight. So I got this new seal hammered in there. I got the old one out. It's that, 2-piece with the O-ring and that metal. And so now what I can do is that I got this housing cleaned off, I'm going to set this guy on here. And it's going to go just like this. Boom, just like that. And you can see there's a race in there. I'm going to get this bearing, and actually I have a new one just in case, because there's a couple spots where that I didn't like. I've got a new one here, and since that race is actually moves in there, it's not a pressed fit, I'm actually going to pop it out real quick and replace it too, because this came with a new race. Okay, so now what I did is I got the vertical shaft through. It's going to be thread side down, because you got to have a nut right here that will lock on down in here. And before I put obviously this shim and this cover on, I have to get this nut tight so that we're locked on to that the gear in there. And then I also put in that seal on the top of the knuckle. There's once again another pair of these O-ring and metal curve piece seals. One goes on the top half, one goes on the bottom half. So obviously, once again, you get this guy in, you get it started, you feed it in, give it a little bit of tap, a little bit of love, and she'll be in. And then obviously she'll compress when you put all this together and put the weight on it and lock it all in and put your top knuckle bolts in. And so what I'm going to do is put the shaft in. I put this in for simplicity, because once this stuff's in, it's kind of hard to work around. So I did the seal, did the shaft. I'm going to lock this guy in place. Put my jam nut back, or my nut in, and then dimple it so it doesn't come out. Put all this together, stand it all up, and then we'll move on to these bearings right here. This is a kind of a funny looking 2-piece, 3-piece bearing. I'm going to clean all this up and re-oil it. This piece is going to go down first because there is a lip on that bevel gear right there, and that's actually what keeps this guy centered. And then you just stack them, and then you put this guy on top of it, and then you put the top gear through the top there, put the snap ring on, and you're pretty much done. Okay, a little side note here. The last part, once you put this together, is you have to put this gear on, and then you have to put the snap ring in, right? Well, unfortunately, the snap ring groove is not exposed with the gear the way it is, probably because this all has to be compressed with the tractor's weight once it's bolted up. So at the moment, what I figured out the best thing to do is take this bottom cover off, loosen that nut, get that snap ring on, and then that gives you a bunch of play on the shaft. And what you can do there is you push that to where the snap ring's touching the gear, and as you tighten this nut down, it'll cinch everything together until it's locked. And then when you put the weight down on the track, you bolt this up to the tractor and you put the weight down on the ground, that will compress this gap right here, which will then loosen everything inside, and which will then just be shimmed by the shims and stuff. So once I got that snap ring groove on, snap ring on in the groove. Next thing, I'm going to tighten this nut down and lock it again, put this cover back on with some new RTV, let it cure, and then I'm going to put this front cover on, and she's ready for install. All right, so we're back with the tractor. I got the knuckle on, or at least the hub assembly on. We have those 5 bolts in the rear. I did put a new O-ring on the axle tube. I cleaned everything off. As you saw on the bench, separates between the top half and the bottom half on this gap, and it kind of just dangles there. And then I got these 5 bolts in, and then what I did is I used my knee and like this, and I pushed straight up to compress this guy on this gap. And then I put this assembly on. There's that nipple right here on the top, and then that goes on, and then I put a shim in here that we reused, and then I put the bolts in the top. I got to figure out where this bolt is. I think I dropped one somewhere here. I'm going to find that in a minute. I got that in, and then I got the hydraulic ram back in its point right there, so that's good. Got the snap ring onto that pin. I cleaned that hole out real well with a wire brush when it was apart. And now what I got to do is find that bolt. And once I sucked these bolts up, this has a shim to set preload on here. And then you have other shims, like the bottom shim on that cap that sets that preload against that bearing, and everything's all together. Everything's wiped down and clean. And now I'm going to shove this guy back in. You've got this O-ring right here, so you don't have to use RTV or nothing, but we're going to shove this all in, put these bolts in, tighten them down, and yeah, pretty much just be done. I'll pull this side plug and fill it with oil, like a quart or so of oil, and then this center tube is going to get oil from the center diff that will fill in and then spill down in here. Over time, it'll level out, but I'm going to start with pre-filling this about halfway, a third of the way, and then let it slosh around. I'll check the actual oil level in a minute and go from there. So now that I got this hub on, I want to point out this was a 3/4 bolt. Those are 7/8. By the way, there's 5 bolts. 4 of them are 40 millimeter. 1 of them is 50 millimeter, and the 50 mil went right here. On the parts diagram, they call it a reamer bolt for some reason. That one goes there. The rest are 40. Just wanted to point that out. Now that I got this guy together, I actually got the front on. I got all these bolts in. This one has a smaller head than the rest of them. If you give me a second, I could tell you what sizes they were. We have... Nope. We have 11/16 for the front bolts, and then I think this was 9/16 for the small one. And the small one, I didn't see, they all were the same depth hole, so I don't know why they use a smaller head, but that's what we have. Final step here is I'm going to pull this drain plug, this fill plug, squirt a bottle of oil in it, run it, put the wheel on it, run it around. I might have to run to the store and, like I said, and get this one, but other than that, this job is pretty much done.